I hadn't planned on staying long. Family barbecues always made me feel like I was back in middle school, awkward, unsure of what to do with my hands while everyone else slid easily into conversations that had been going on for decades. The smell of charcoal clung to the air, mixed with laughter and the metallic rattle of soda cans opening. That was when I saw her, Elena, my aunt by marriage, standing near the grill with a glass of wine balanced against her hip. She wasn't doing anything special, just talking, laughing at something my uncle said, brushing hair off her face when the wind picked up. Still, my eyes kept finding her, as if my brain hadn't caught up to the fact that she was family, older, completely off limits. She caught me looking once, and the corners of her mouth curved, not in surprise, but in quiet amusement, like she'd noticed before I did. When I went to help carry trays from the kitchen, she followed, barefoot on the cool tiles. "You work at that repair shop downtown, right?" she asked, passing me a bowl of salad. "Yeah," I said, adjusting my grip. "Mostly cars that should have been put out of their misery years ago." She laughed, low and unhurried. "You sound like my first boyfriend." I didn't know what to do with that. Her tone wasn't flirtatious exactly. It was nostalgic, wistful, like she'd opened a door just a crack and then immediately closed it again. We set the food down outside. The light had turned golden, that syrupy hour before sunset when everything feels softer, slower. I was turning to leave when she brushed past me. An accident, I think, but her hand grazed my forearm, a warm, brief touch that left the air buzzing. "Here," she said, holding out a small plate. "Try this. Better than anything on that grill." Her voice carried something I couldn't name, playful, but underneath, something steadier. I took a bite just to have something to do. "It's good," I managed. "Of course it is." She smiled, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something faintly citrus, grounded by smoke. I made it myself. Then someone called her name, and she was gone, slipping into another conversation as if the moment hadn't just stretched between us like static. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop watching her. The way she touched people's arms when she spoke, how she leaned in slightly when she laughed, the quiet confidence that made everyone else fade a little. She wasn't loud, but somehow she was always at the center of things, like the flame everyone gathered around without realizing why. When she finally looked my way again, it was only for a second, long enough for a shared understanding to flicker, something unspoken, something that shouldn't have been there at all. Later, after everyone had eaten too much and the kids were running through sprinklers, I sat on the back steps with a half-finished beer. The night was humming with crickets, the grill long cold. She passed by again, carrying a tray of empty glasses. "Long day?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Feels longer than it should." She paused, as if deciding whether to say something else, then gave a small nod. "You'll get used to that. The years start to stretch differently after a while." Her words lingered long after she disappeared inside. I didn't understand why I kept thinking about that moment. Her hand, her voice, the way she said "better than anything on that grill," as if it meant something more. But later that night, lying in bed with the smell of smoke still on my clothes, I realized it wasn't just the food she'd been talking about. It had been a few weeks since the barbecue when I saw her again. My uncle had brought his car into the shop, something about a noise it shouldn't be making, and she was the one who came to pick it up. I almost didn't recognize her at first. The midday light was unkind, flattening everything, but she still looked like she belonged somewhere softer, somewhere the air didn't smell like oil and steel. She wore sunglasses and a loose white blouse that caught on the breeze. The contrast between her and the grease-stained garage felt almost cinematic. "Hey," I said, wiping my hands on a rag that probably made things worse. She smiled, a little caught off guard. "Didn't know you worked here full-time." "Yeah, my boss says I'm here so much I should start paying rent." That earned me a small laugh, quiet, but real. Then something passed across her face, a flicker I couldn't name. Tiredness maybe, or something heavier. "The car's ready," I said, gesturing toward the back. "We replaced the alternator. Should start like new now." She followed me, her heels clicking against the concrete, the sound oddly precise in the empty space. "You always this serious when you talk about cars?" "Only when they're stubborn," I said. Kind of like people. That got another smile, but she didn't look at me this time. Her hand brushed the hood lightly, fingers tracing a faint line in the dust. There was a ring mark on her skin where a wedding band used to sit. I didn't mean to notice, but once I did, it was all I could see. You okay? I asked before I could stop myself. She hesitated, then laughed softly. You sound like my doctor. Sorry, you just look tired. The words hung there longer than I meant them to. She tilted her head, finally meeting my eyes. You shouldn't say things like that. Makes people think you notice too much. I guess I do. The corner of her mouth lifted again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. She opened the car door and sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. I stood there awkwardly, unsure if I should walk away or wait for a goodbye. Her hand rested on the gear shift. For a second, she just stared at it, thumb brushing the leather. You ever feel like you've been living the same day for years? Yeah, I said quietly. Pretty much every day. She looked up then, and there it was, that same pull I'd felt at the barbecue, the one that made the air feel too thin. I didn't move closer, didn't say anything else. I just stood there, memorizing the way her hair caught the sunlight and the small, tired tremor in her smile. She turned the key, and the engine started with a clean hum. Guess you fixed it, she said. Guess so. She lingered a moment longer, window halfway down, eyes forward but not seeing. You've got good hands, she said finally, so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then she drove off, the sound of her tires fading into the afternoon heat, leaving me standing in the doorway, hands still resting on the rack, heart running faster than any engine I'd ever worked on. It started raining just before closing time. The kind of rain that didn't sound like much until you stepped outside and realized it wasn't stopping anytime soon. I was wiping down the counters when the bell above the door chimed, and there she was again, hair damp, shoulders speckled with raindrops, holding a folder against her chest. Of all the days, she said, shaking her head lightly. Your uncle said you could look at some paperwork for him. Hope I'm not interrupting. She wasn't, but the words came out differently. You're fine. I took the folder, our fingers brushing, barely, but enough to make something shift. She smelled like rain and faint perfume, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just lingers. You can wait inside, I said. The rain's not letting up soon. She hesitated, then nodded, setting her things on the workbench. The shop felt smaller with her in it. I tried to focus on the papers, the numbers blurring together as the sound of rain deepened, steady, relentless. You always stay this late? She asked. Someone has to lock up, I said, not looking up. You don't have to sound like a martyr, she said softly. That made me glance at her. She was leaning against the counter, arms folded, watching the rain slide down the window. There was something fragile in her posture, like she was holding herself together out of habit. Rough day? I asked. She gave a tired laugh. Rough year. Then, quieter, but I'm still standing. That's something. I wanted to ask more, but she was already looking away. A phone buzzed on the counter, hers. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, but her expression told me enough. She let it ring out, the sound echoing in the stillness. Don't you need to? No, she said quickly. Not tonight. The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain. I could hear her breathing, slow, steady, but not calm. She moved closer, reaching for the folder. You shouldn't have to clean up all this by yourself, she said, taking a rag from the hook. It's fine, I started, but she was already wiping the counter beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth from her sleeve brushing mine. Guess we're both bad at leaving things unfinished, I said. That made her stop. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The sound of rain filled the space where words should have been. Her hand stilled on the counter, fingers curling slightly. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered, echoing her line from before. But this time, her voice wavered. I looked at her then, really looked. The small crease between her brows, the faint tiredness under her eyes, the way her breath hitched like she'd forgotten how to exhale. I didn't mean, I started. I know, but she didn't step back. And I didn't either. The distance between us wasn't much, half a breath, maybe. Just enough to feel the confusion rising between what should happen and what almost did. Then her phone buzzed again, sharp and insistent. She flinched, muttered something, and stepped away, the moment breaking like glass. "I should go," she said, grabbing her things. "Thanks for the help." I nodded, though my throat was tight. When she left, the doorbell chimed again, and I was left alone with the smell of rain, the sound of her footsteps fading, and the ghost of something that hadn't happened, something that probably shouldn't, but still wanted to. It was late. The shop was empty, lights dimmed to a soft yellow glow that made every shadow feel longer than it should. I was stacking tools, trying to convince myself that organizing wrenches could erase the memory of her hands brushing mine, the rain still dripping from her hair in my mind. "You're here late again," she said from the doorway. I hadn't even noticed her arrive. I was finishing up, I muttered, more to the floor than to her. She stepped inside, not closing the door behind her. The sound of the street, damp from the recent storm, filtered in quietly. "We're pretending a lot, aren't we?" I froze. Pretending? The word felt like ice in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "You and me this," she gestured vaguely, a small, frustrated motion. "It's like we're dancing around something that doesn't have a name, and pretending it's just normal." I swallowed. "Maybe it is normal. Maybe I'm just quiet," she interrupted, voice low, a tremor undercutting her usual composure. "Or maybe you're scared of saying what you feel. Or maybe I am." I wanted to reach for her, but something in her posture, shoulders drawn in, eyes avoiding mine, made me hesitate. I stayed where I was, hands awkward at my sides, heart thrumming too loudly. She moved closer, slow, careful. The air between us was thick, each step a small quake. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, voice softer now, almost fragile. "I shouldn't feel like I do. And yet I do." Her hands were empty, but I noticed the way they twitched at her sides, fingers curling, uncurling. The faint tension in her jaw, the almost imperceptible sigh that escaped her lips, it all said more than words ever could. "I don't know either," I whispered. My voice sounded strange, even to me, caught somewhere between honesty and fear. She stopped a foot away, the dim light catching the faint silver in her hair. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. No touch, no movement. Just the electricity of unsaid things buzzing in the small space. "You're younger," she said finally, almost as if to explain it away. "And I have too much past, too many mistakes, too many things I shouldn't feel." "Then why do you?" I asked, and the words came out before I could stop them. Her eyes flickered, a storm behind them. "Because it's impossible not to," she whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick with everything we weren't allowed to name. Every breath felt like a secret, every glance a confession we couldn't fully give. I wanted to ask her what we were doing, what this meant, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I let my eyes trace the small details I hadn't dared notice before. The faint calluses on her fingers, the tired curve of her shoulders, the way her gaze softened when it caught mine for even a second. She turned slightly, as if preparing to leave, but didn't move away completely. Her voice cracked when she spoke again, barely audible. "Don't make me regret noticing you." Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of her words, and the sick, delicious ache of knowing we were both dangerously close to something neither of us could define. I didn't expect her to show up that afternoon. The shop smelled of motor oil and warm metal, sunlight cutting through the half-open garage door in sharp, lazy beams. She walked in carrying a worn envelope, the corners bent like it had been handled too many times. "I found this while sorting through some old things," she said, voice even but brittle underneath. She set it on the counter between us. The handwriting was unfamiliar, delicate, and it made the air between us feel suddenly heavier. I looked at her, unsure how to start. "What is it?" She shrugged, though her shoulders were stiff. "A letter, from someone I used to care about. Someone I lost before I thought I could ever feel again." I wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt wrong. Instead, I just nodded, letting her speak on her own. They left," she continued quietly. "Not with a fight, not with a word. Just disappeared. And somehow, the memory of them stuck. It's why her voice faltered, and she exhaled sharply. Why I keep people at a distance. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the envelope, and I noticed the small tremble in her hand. The delicate way her wrist tilted, the slight catch in her breath. It made her feel human in a way she rarely let anyone see. You know, I said softly, you remind me of someone I lost once too. Not exactly the same, but someone who left a space I didn't know how to fill. She glanced up at me, eyes widening slightly, unguarded for a flicker of a second. Really? Yeah, I said, trying not to sound too intense. The way you talk, the way you carry yourself. You make me think of what it's like to care so much it scares you. The silence that followed was layered, almost tangible. Her lips pressed together, as if she were chewing on a word that wouldn't come. I could see her eyes shimmer with something unspoken, grief, maybe, or recognition of the space between us. I didn't mean for this to. I mean, she started, then paused, caught in the weight of her own admission. It's just hard. All of it. Feeling something, remembering someone, noticing you. It's all tangled up. I nodded, understanding more than I should, feeling the shift in the room like a tide moving underfoot. Her hand hovered over the envelope again, and I felt the pull of wanting to reach for it, to reach for her, but the restraint held me back. She finally tucked the letter under her arm and looked at me, the vulnerability raw and exposed. I don't usually let anyone see this side of me, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to, I replied. I just see it. And it's okay. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, sad, fragile, and oddly luminous. Then, without another word, she turned toward the door. I watched her walk out. The envelope pressed close to her chest, and I felt something shift in me too. Something heavier than longing, something quieter than desire, but seismic all the same. As the door clicked shut, I found myself tracing the space she'd left behind, aware that nothing would ever feel quite the same after this. It was late evening when she appeared at the shop again, a quiet knock at the half-open door. The garage smelled faintly of oil and dust, the lights casting long, soft shadows. I had been cleaning up, trying to organize tools in a way that didn't matter, when I realized she'd been standing there, waiting for me to notice. You stayed late, she said, voice calm but carrying that tension that had settled between us like sediment. I could say the same about you, I replied, setting down the wrench I had been holding. We didn't rush. She came inside, brushing her wet hair back with her fingers, the droplets catching the dim light. There was no small talk, no pretense. The silence itself felt loaded, honest in a way words had never been able to be between us. You know, she began, settling onto a stool near the workbench. I've tried not to feel this. But it's pointless, isn't it? I swallowed, feeling the weight of her honesty. I felt it too, I admitted. From the first time you walked into my life like a storm I couldn't read. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, though her eyes remained steady on mine. A storm I couldn't control either, she whispered. We didn't move closer, not immediately. We just stayed where we were, the space between us smaller than usual, but still deliberate. I watched the way her hands rested on her lap, fingers loosely entwined. I wanted to reach out, and so did she, though neither of us did, at first. Then something shifted, a shared exhale, a quiet acknowledgement, and her hand brushed mine as she reached for a pen. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it carried a weight neither of us could ignore. My fingers stayed in place, waiting, letting the moment breathe instead of rushing it. Do you think, she said softly, voice almost lost to the hum of the overhead lights, we've been pretending too long? Yes, I admitted. Pretending it's okay to stay apart when it hasn't been okay for either of us. She didn't argue. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, forehead almost touching mine, the faint warmth of her breath brushing my skin. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was enough. Enough to collapse the distance that had held us in restraint for so long. Her hand shifted, fingers lightly resting against mine, and I felt it as if a final lock had clicked into place. No words were needed. No grand declarations. Just shared understanding, and the quiet certainty that what had been building would no longer be denied. We sat like that for minutes, maybe longer, just the two of us in a space filled with unspoken admissions, the faint smell of oil, her perfume, and the soft glow of light around us. When she finally straightened, still holding my hand loosely, she gave a small, resigned nod. "Then, this is us," she said, almost more to herself than to me. "Yes," I said, softly, feeling the same truth settle into me. And in that silence, it was enough. Looking back now, months later, I can still remember the smell of the garage that night, the warm metal, faint oil, and that trace of her perfume that clung to the air like a secret. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would think could hold something like this, but somehow it did. Somehow, in the quiet hum of tools and dim light, we found a rhythm neither of us had expected. I've changed. I notice things more now. The pauses in conversation, the way a hand lingers on a counter, the weight behind a single glance. I've learned that love isn't always fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small, steady acknowledgments that matter most. And it's terrifying in its simplicity. She's changed too. The walls she built around herself aren't gone. They'll never fully be gone, but there are doors now. Doors that open without apology, moments where she trusts without hesitation, and a rare softness that only appears when she's with me. She's learned that letting someone in doesn't have to mean losing herself. Our connection isn't perfect. It's messy, quiet, and entirely ours. We still navigate boundaries, tread lightly around old scars, and stumble through moments of doubt. But it's real, and that's something I couldn't have anticipated when I first saw her at that barbecue, laughing at my uncle's terrible jokes while the sunlight caught her hair just so. I think about that first touch, the brief brush of her hand against mine, and the way it set a chain of moments into motion. Moments that taught me that closeness isn't always immediate, that desire doesn't always announce itself with loud proclamations. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and insists softly until you can't ignore it anymore. We've learned to exist in that whisper, to honor it, to let it shape us without rushing it. And in doing so, we've discovered a love that isn't about perfection, but about recognition, seeing someone fully and allowing them to see you, too. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at the memory of her leaning forward in that dim light, fingers brushing mine, forehead almost touching. That quiet, steady certainty that no one else could replicate. That feeling lingers, and it's enough to make everything else fall away. And in the end, maybe that's the point. Love doesn't always need to be dramatic. It can be quiet, it can be patient, it can be ordinary, and still, in its own subtle way, extraordinary. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?